We have some stats here from the last 10 years, which are impressive enough. But then if we go back 20 years, that's really where it gets mind-blowing. There's been a growth of 350% in terms of the number of schools, and a growth of 520% in terms of the number of students. So international schools, I think as everybody here is aware, they're really a growing presence on the education scene. Okay, ISMLA, of course, is originally an organization for British schools. And so it's interesting to note that actually 52% of international schools are oriented towards a UK style of teaching, whilst 20% follow the IB, whether that's the PYP, the MYP, or the DP. And even though you might not think it from all the marketing that the IB does, the A-level is actually currently the most popular exit examination at international schools. Slightly, there's 2% more schools offering the A-level compared to the IB. And then you do get some schools like ours that do both. And I've shared that with a few colleagues, and people have been very, very surprised because everyone assumes that IB is the dominant player. It's not actually true. So I think it's evident from that, but also that the British school brand is very powerful. But another example to illustrate that is how in recent years, 44 schools in China that have their founding schools in Great Britain have opened up. And I think, we all know what those schools are: Dulwich, Wellington, Shrewsbury, Wickham Abbey. Lots of different schools are trying to open branches abroad for various reasons. One thing, I guess, to note in terms of how international schools have changed as well, or how the scene has changed, is in the 90s, your typical international school was one that was an embassy or a very specific community school, predominantly serving the interests of the Western expatriate community. And often the curricula would reflect that, would be closely aligned to the nation's national curriculum, whether that's American or British. Today that's changed, and it's still changing. There's a lot more different types of school out there, including a number of bilingual schools, serving a wide range of demographics. Certainly not just Western expats anymore, but Eastern expats, expats from all over the world, really. It reflects globalization, and also a much bigger number of local students attending the international schools where they're allowed to. In Singapore, local kids can't attend international schools unless they get a special exception, but it's not the case in all countries. So what's the role of ISMLA in the UK? I think it's useful to go through that before thinking about how it marries with us going international. So advocacy, collaboration, and support. We have about 200 schools under ISMLA, both in the UK and abroad. And the reason schools keep coming back to us is that we act as a representative for them with policy stakeholders, so the government or exam boards, as well as other national and international organizations. And there's been great success there. I know that I don't know if some of them are in the audience here, but there's some members of ISMLA who have worked tirelessly to lobby the government regarding A-level and harsh marking, for example, and they've had a real impact there. Okay, collaboration as well, getting teachers in the same room, getting schools together to collaborate on what's good teaching, but also various competitions. We have ISMLA sponsoring the debate competitions in the UK, but also essay competitions, etc. And then finally, support CPD, professional development. We normally have an annual conference. Sadly, because of the strike, that's had to change in format this year. But we've also had a number of specific language days, so ISMLA French Day, ISMLA Spanish Day, ISMLA Italian Day, but also it's that network and allowing colleagues to get together, talk to each other, and mentor each other as well. There's been a mentoring program for teachers wanting to get into management, for example. So, I hope by showing you the growth that's happened in the international sector, that I hope to show you that there's perhaps an opportunity for ISMLA to step into the void and help and encourage language specialist teachers to collaborate and to come together and support each other. And this would have to take place beyond specific programs. So, you know, teachers get together internationally at IB workshops and things, but ISMLA would allow that to happen beyond a specific program, beyond international school groups like FOBASIA and COBIS, which are non-language specialist groups, and of course beyond borders, which I think as language teachers, that's something that speaks to us all. What would it look like? What could it look like when we go international? Well, that's up to us, really, as members and as aspiring contributors. So that's really what I want to look at and explore in the rest of this presentation. I want to explore how teaching languages is different when you go abroad. I think there's a lot of similarities between teaching in the UK and teaching abroad. Of course, there are. You know, good language teaching is good language teaching, but there are some differences, and I want to explore that because understanding those differences is going to help us as an organisation to better meet the needs of our members. John, could I just ask you to mute, please, John Wilson? Thank you. And then I'll go through the advantages and the challenges as well that teachers face. Okay, so I think, you know, one obvious difference is that when you go international, you're more likely to have a much more diverse and multilingual student and staff body. That's not to say the UK indie sector or the UK schools are not multilingual and diverse. You know, I think more than 10% of students in the private sector have a foreign passport. But, you know, by their very nature, international schools are more likely to be a little bit more diverse and a little bit more multilingual. Here are some pictures from a recent event we had in school, and it's we've got some support staff here helping out with the event, and then also some students as well in their national dresses. And as you can see, there's a real variety there. Another difference is you have more IB, okay? And even if your school doesn't do IB, I think it's had an impact on how we talk about languages internationally. You know, there's two key differences between the IB and the traditional UK A-level system when it comes to languages. One is that you have to do a language up to the age of 18, and the second is that you have to have, as a school, a whole school language policy. And so it just puts languages on the map, and it doesn't make it, you know, it means that it can never be considered as a minor subject, but also, as we're going to explore later, it allows us to nuance the debate a little bit around languages. Okay, and that links to the next point really, which is, yeah, it's not just seen as a subject, but rather a core part of the education model. I've included some screenshots from some websites of schools just in my neck of the woods. You know, and when we talk about languages on the website, it's not something that's in the list of subjects on the website. It's very much something that's, you know, front and center, you know, next to pastoral care, STEAM, digital literacy, outdoor education, learning support, results. You know, it's there, it's present, and there's a recognition that languages are a big thing, and that's great to see and great to work in places like that. And of course, again, that's not to say that there aren't IB schools in the UK. You know, I think there's around 100, but there's more of them internationally. Okay, another thing is we have more bilingual schools and programs in some countries like Thailand and the UAE, and I think we have a number of teachers from the UAE there. It's actually a government requirement that local citizens follow lessons related to the local language, culture, history, and tradition. And there's a desire, I think, on the part of many parents as well, for their child to learn to value their home language and cultural heritage. I don't know if you've all heard of the third culture kid thing, the phenomenon, but it's this internationally schooled kid who doesn't really feel tied to any sort of country or tradition or culture, and bilingual programs and schools, I think, go some way to helping with that. And it's quite remarkable to note that now 33% of international schools try to offer bilingual learning. And I think as someone who set up a mother tongue program and got to explore different schools and how they were doing this, I think it's fair to say that there's varying success with these bilingual programs and a lot of marketing behind it, but there's also some real success stories. And actually, I thought I'd show a couple of showcases of again, some schools in my area in a second. But before I do that, I guess one thing that happens when you have more second language speakers in school and a more diverse student body as well, and you have the IB, is as I said, that debate around languages gets a bit more nuanced, and so you'll see many schools that offer foreign language streams like sorry, my screen froze for a second there. And here are some examples of some mother tongue programs. So UWC, just down the road from us, they've got 400 students following a mother tongue program in their school, two campuses in Singapore. And it's not just based around one or two communities, it's 18 different languages. And there's an option for all of those students to take that language right through to the age of 18 and do the IB Language A program, either as a school-supported self-taught subject or as a fully taught course. It's hardcore literature that they'll be doing in their language, and it mirrors the English Language A program. But you know, having that as the end goal for students really provides a lot of direction for teachers and parents who want to get to that level. So that's one example in Singapore. Another example is NIST in Bangkok. Again, you can see all the different languages on option. A huge number. You know, I think they'll have a lot of students from the UN workers, people who work in the UN. There's a big UN community in Bangkok, and so there'll be a desire amongst the students and the parents for kids to carry on with their mother tongues. And it won't be that all of these are going to be perfect mother tongue speakers. You know, many of them might be heritage speakers at a decent level, but you know, I think as schools, it makes sense for us to assist parents and students in building on the knowledge that they've been gifted, rather than kind of just pretend it doesn't exist or leave it in the private sphere as the parents and kids can work on. So yeah, I think overall you can see that the landscape for teaching languages internationally does vary, you know, quite a bit from teaching in the UK, although it's the degree of that I think probably depends on which school you're in and which city you're in the UK. But what are the advantages of this? What are the pros? Okay, I think increased visibility of the languages faculty, something I've already touched upon, but also increased enthusiasm for languages. I've never heard anyone say, what's the point of learning languages? Whereas when I was in the UK, I did hear that. Consequently, I think there's a better appreciation of the nuances of our job as well, and the value of languages by management and the board. And I think you know, when we're trying to push forward initiatives as language teachers, when we're arguing for change, that really makes a difference, because you don't have to waste as much time talking about, you know, the differences in levels, etc. Everyone just is a bit more fluent when it comes to talking about language policy. You have to be when you're working in an international school, because the parents care about it. You know, I think this applies to certain places in the UK, like London, but you know, I think most international schools tend to be based in cosmopolitan cities, and so there's lots of opportunities on offer there as well because of that. You know, there's communities out there for the different language groups, and then there's writers, speakers, thinkers, chefs, business owners who are willing to work with schools as well, and put on enrichment projects. So you know, I think that's a nice thing about being in international schools. Got a few pictures here, all kind of linked. You know, less of a monoculture, so more opportunities for enrichment events. Here's some pictures from some international days that we've run in school, and language days. I think every international school I've heard of runs something, like an international day, and it's a great opportunity for everyone to get together. It's not to say that these things don't happen in the UK. I think they do. I don't know if Nick Mayor's there, but I know that Dulwich has run some really successful language weeks in the past. But I think maybe it just flows a bit more naturally in an international school where celebrating that diversity is that little bit more important. And there's a real well of support from the parents, I think, to help. We had like 40 stands here, hundreds of parents all wanting to share about their culture and their language, and that was just exciting. What are the challenges, though? I think talking about what is a mother tongue student, what is a second language student, what is a heritage student, that's always difficult and requires huge amounts of time. It's often has to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, and especially as you move up the school, it can be problematic, because I think sometimes students and sometimes parents, they want the easy choice for their kids, and it might not be an appropriate challenge for them, and the school needs to work out where they stand on that. We as a school, we've communicated with other schools in Singapore in the past in order to have a clear line, but there's always attempts to blur those lines, for sure. It's a constant battle, I would say, as a languages manager. It's not something we face here in my school, but I know from meeting lots of people that other international school teachers, that working with local language staff can cause there can be some tensions around that, because sometimes there's real injustices in terms of inequality of pay between locally employed staff and expatriate teachers. So, for example, in China, some of the local Chinese teachers would be earning 30% of what their colleagues are earning, and obviously that can impact morale and motivation and all sorts of things. But also, I think local teachers sometimes might have a different way of teaching, because they know their subject best. Bridging those cultural differences and professional differences often, I think, can be quite tricky. Language assistance, I think that's a challenging one. I know since Brexit in the UK, it's become a bit more complicated, but we've never had a British council when we've been working abroad, so it's always been a matter of sourcing them independently, and that can be a bit of a minefield in terms of navigating the local employment law. I know Singapore's just changed their law, and it means that we have to get rid of our beloved language assistant for French, and find someone else who's got a permanent residency. So yeah, I think that can be complicated, and I think there's a lot of international schools that don't have language assistants as well. If they're IB, can be quite hard to find the time for language assistants to work with students. It'd be interesting to do a poll at some point about who has those in international schools. And then finally, I think this is, with a focus on European languages, but the distance that we are from Europe sometimes, especially here in Asia, I think that can be really tricky in terms of running trips. You've got to factor in the jet lag, the cost. You often need, because of the cost, you need a minimum number. Sometimes cultural differences when it comes to perspectives on health and danger. So that's one issue. And also, and linked to this, I think in the UK, I think there's a lot of cultural knowledge that kind of gets absorbed by osmosis almost, just from the fact that the UK is so close to mainland Europe. It gets talked about in the press, people go on holiday there, and parents often study the language, etc., etc. I think when you're international, you can't be certain that there's any of those factors at play, really, actually, and so a real battle for us as language teachers is imparting that cultural knowledge. And here at Tanglin, actually, we're quite excited for the first time to assess on cultural knowledge for the first time next year. We're gonna have a stab at that and see how it works out, to see if by doing so we're going to encourage a little bit more thinking along those lines, which we think is really important and an important part of the language learning journey. Okay, so where can ISMLA help? We talked about advocacy, and we talked about collaboration and support earlier. I think advocacy with external bodies, so exam boards, we could certainly help there. We've got different specs often, international A-level, for example, international IGCSE, but also the IB, you know, where we feel that there's things that don't work. Sometimes it's more helpful as a collective to write a response than doing it as individuals, when you can say that we represent a certain number of people, etc. And likewise, internally, I think when we, some of the most helpful things I've had from ISMLA is when we've been sharing a number of hours we teach languages and how we structure our language lessons. That's been, getting that data has been really useful when making arguments internally to management and the governors, and being able to say, well, you know, these schools do it like this, you know, you need to think about that, and you know, what you're suggesting maybe, you know, goes against the grain, and having that network there is really useful, I think, for that. When it comes to collaboration, best practice, resource sharing, professional opportunities, enrichment, you know, all of those things, a lot of those things are actually we'd have in common with teachers in the UK, but also we do have our own contexts, as I hope I've shown you, and I think perhaps some of the minority languages in the UK would actually be majority languages in international schools. You know, I'm so glad to see that we've got lots of teachers from the UAE today, and you know, Arabic is an example there. It's not a huge language in the UK, but it is getting it is a huge thing in the Middle East for obvious reasons. So, you know, having a different context, why couldn't we have an Arabic ISMLA Day at some point? And I guess it's the same with professional development, mentoring, and events as well. Okay, I can see it's 2:30 already, so I don't know if there are any questions. I'm not sure there are. Yeah, I think because of the time, perhaps what we'll do is, if you've got any questions that have come from this, if you could hold on to those and maybe ask me after Steve's presentation, when there's a break for the Dubai teachers or the Middle Eastern teachers, and I can then do my best to answer them then. So I think what I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen and hand over to Steve.